Turning now to important developments in this challenge of rising political violence in America, and a story involving two former presidents. You may recall them. This was their only in-person meeting at the White House before the transition. Donald Trump recently posted the Obama's address, after which a Trump supporter brought heavy-duty weaponry near the Obama's home. A new court filing regarding the indictment of this Trump fan says that he basically used the same app online as Donald Trump to repost the Obama's address after Trump, and writing, "We got these losers surrounded. See you in hell." The individual is a known January 6 rioter, Taylor Taranto. Authorities were already hunting to arrest him for activities related to the insurrection and threats made against perceived Trump opponents like Jamie Raskin and Speaker McCarthy. They then caught him outside of a van that he apparently lives in, where they confiscated 2 guns, a machete, explosive materials, and about 400 rounds of ammunition. Now, he was also, as mentioned, caught on tape trespassing inside the Capitol on January 6th, so he faces 4 charges from that day and new charges connected to his armed visit to Obama's neighborhood. So this is a very specific case where, on the one hand, he was apprehended, and so there was no harm. And so you might say, well, there's a certain threat level in all of these cases. On the other hand, just imagine, heaven forbid, if he had used any of that weaponry against anyone in that neighborhood or anyone at that residence, or even against, apparently, his perceived target, the Obamas themselves. This is what authorities have been warning about. And we, of course, are living through it. So if you watch the news on the one hand, you may say, okay, Ari, yeah, I'm familiar. But this is very important to seep into many aspects of how we govern ourselves in this country. Civic, law enforcement, and I'll say culturally. Do we understand the nature of the threat? You know, it's a contrast to that era, say, after 9/11, when the largest threats on the home front were deemed by the security agencies and other indications to be largely foreign terrorists or lone wolves who might be inspired by foreign terrorism and try to help those folks. Well, that era is clearly over, and the facts and the law enforcement leaders are telling us something else, that white supremacist extremists and other domestic right-wing criminals and terrorists are the threat.
The most significant and persistent terrorism-related threat facing our country today, which stems from both homegrown and domestic violent extremists.
Domestic violent extremists, radicalized by personalized grievances, ranging from racial and ethnic bias to anti-government, anti-authority sentiment, to conspiracy theories.
That second speaker you hear there is Director Wray, who happened to be picked under the last Trump administration. And he's saying it in the sort of the language of law enforcement, somewhat, maybe you want to call it diplomatically, but he's talking about right-wing MAGA. He's talking about people with government grievances, racial grievances, and right-wing conspiracy theorists, domestic extremists. We are living through this. And it's something of a resorting and disruption of the threat assessment. So on the one hand, there are these incidents with Trump's inflammatory role well known, from January 6th to other, sometimes lesser-known incidents. There was a lone wolf attack on an FBI field office just last year when Trump was clashing with the FBI over his legal problems. There was a 2018 plot by a MAGA supporter who sent homemade pipe bombs to perceived Trump critics. Authorities then found him in a white van plastered with Trump stickers in Florida. On the other hand, the DOJ's prosecution of the people who led the insurrection has already shown that this kind of violence and right-wing sedition has immediate and terrible consequences. Let me show you the numbers. We've mentioned this before, but you have over 1,000 arrests and already over 500 people convicted and sent to prison. In fact, very few people have beat a case coming out of the DOJ's Jan 6 probe. You have a convicted seditionist militia leader, Stuart Rhodes, now doing 18 years by one example, and he recently said he expects Trump will be convicted in his own trial as well. And these are the kind of stiff penalties that are also credited for gutting any replay of a January 6th type event at either of Trump's recent arraignments, where the former president posted and clamored and called for large crowds, but he could barely summon any big gathering, let alone anybody willing to risk prison with more criminal activity on behalf of a leader who seems to sometimes demand it. So, if we take it all together here, there's obviously more than one thing going on. Some in law enforcement say the numbers show measurable improvement against this tough challenge. Or as Paul McCartney put it in a different context, it's getting better, a little better all the time. But compared to what? And I bring you John Lennon's reply in a different context. It can't get no worse.